What happens when a mother's love for her son-in-law twists into a deadly obsession? What dark secrets can a family hide behind the veneer of perfection? Today, we delve into a story so shocking, so deeply disturbing, it will make you question everything you thought you knew about the bonds of family. A tale of forbidden desire, ultimate betrayal, and a crime so heinous it defies imagination. Before we unravel this chilling narrative, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, so you don't miss out on our gripping stories. Now, prepare yourselves as we uncover the sinister truth of a mother who loved her son-in-law, murdered her own daughter, and threw the body into a waste disposal machine. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm croissants typically enveloped the Sterling residence in a comforting embrace, an olfactory testament to domestic tranquility and understated wealth. To any observer, the sprawling, meticulously landscaped estate was the very picture of success, a tangible manifestation of the perfect life Eleanor Sterling had so carefully curated. Her daughter, Clara, and Clara's husband, Julian, were the crowning jewels of this masterpiece, living proof of her impeccable taste and unwavering devotion. But on this particular morning, a palpable tension hung in the air, as thick and oppressive as the late summer humidity. From the archway of the grand, open-plan kitchen, Eleanor watched her son-in-law, Julian, as he leaned against the marble countertop. He was a portrait of masculine grace, even in his casual weekend attire. His dark hair was artfully tousled, and the sleeves of his soft, gray Henley were pushed up to his elbows, revealing strong forearms dusted with fine, dark hair. He was laughing at something Clara had said, a low, resonant sound that vibrated through Eleanor's very being. It was a sound she coveted, a sound she felt, in the deepest recesses of her heart, should be directed at her. Clara, her own flesh and blood, seemed a pale imitation of the beauty Eleanor herself had once possessed. It wasn't that Clara was unattractive. She was pleasant to look at, with her soft, mousy brown hair and gentle, doe-like eyes. But she lacked the fire, the spark that Eleanor knew still flickered within her own soul, a smoldering ember that Julian's presence seemed to fan into a blaze. Clara was placid. She was a calm, serene lake, while Eleanor was a tempestuous ocean, deep and full of untold secrets. "You're staring, mother?" Clara said, her voice a gentle admonishment. She turned from Julian, her smile faltering slightly as she met Eleanor's intense gaze. "Is everything all right?" "Of course, darling," Eleanor replied, her voice as smooth as silk as she glided into the room. She placed a perfectly manicured hand on Julian's arm, a possessive gesture that did not go unnoticed by her daughter. "I was just admiring what a handsome couple you make. I'm so proud of the life you've built together." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. Proud? She was consumed by a jealousy so fierce it was a physical ache in her chest. She saw the way Julian looked at Clara, with a tenderness and a deep, abiding love that she, Eleanor, had never known from any man, not even her late husband, a man who had been more of a business partner than a passionate lover. He had provided her with wealth and status, but he had never looked at her with the adoration she saw in Julian's eyes when he gazed at her daughter. "We learned from the best," Julian said, his voice a warm caress. He turned his hand under hers, his fingers lacing with hers in a way that sent a jolt of electricity through her. It was a casual, familial gesture, but to Eleanor, it was a spark of hope, a sign that he felt it too, this undeniable connection that crackled between them whenever they were near. Clara, oblivious, beamed at them both. "We're so lucky to have you, mother. I don't know what we'd do without you." And that was the crux of it, wasn't it? They did need her. After Clara's father had passed away, leaving Eleanor a very wealthy widow, she had insisted that the young couple move in with her. It was a practical arrangement, she had told them. The estate was far too large for one woman, and it would give them a chance to save for their own home, to build their future on a solid foundation. But the truth was, she couldn't bear the thought of them being anywhere else, of Julian being out of her sight, out of her reach. The days had bled into weeks, the weeks into months, and now 2 years had passed since they had come to live under her roof. 2 years of stolen glances, of lingering touches, of conversations that skirted the edge of something deeper, something more dangerous. Eleanor had become an expert at orchestrating moments alone with Julian. She would send Clara on errands, invent tasks in the garden that required a man's strength, or simply wait until her daughter had retired for the evening to seek him out in the library, where he often worked late. They would talk for hours, their conversations ranging from literature and art to politics and finance. He was intelligent, witty, and possessed a depth of soul that she found utterly intoxicating. He listened to her, truly listened, in a way that no one ever had. He valued her opinions, sought her advice, and made her feel seen, not as a mother-in-law, not as a widow, but as a woman. A desirable woman. And the desire was a ravenous beast within her, a hunger that grew with each passing day. She started to pay more attention to her appearance, her wardrobe shifting from tasteful and elegant to something more daring, more alluring. She spent hours at the gym, her body toned and sculpted, a testament to her iron will. She was 52 years old, but she looked a decade younger, and she knew that Julian had noticed. She saw it in the way his eyes would linger on her, the way his breath would catch when she entered a room. The tension between them was a taut wire, humming with unspoken longing. But there was always Clara, a constant, gentle presence, a reminder of the boundaries that should not be crossed. Clara, who loved her husband with a fierce, unwavering devotion. Clara, who trusted her mother implicitly, who would never suspect the darkness that festered in the heart of the woman who had given her life. The breaking point, the moment when the simmering resentment in Eleanor's heart boiled over into something far more malevolent, came on the day of Clara and Julian's third wedding anniversary. Eleanor had planned an extravagant party for them, a glittering affair with a guest list that included the crème de la crème of their social circle. She had spared no expense, transforming the ballroom of the estate into a fairy tale setting, with cascading floral arrangements, crystal chandeliers, and a string quartet playing softly in the background. She had worn a gown of deep crimson silk, a dress that clung to her curves in all the right places, a stark contrast to the pale, ethereal blue that Clara had chosen. She had watched with a hawk's eye as Julian and Clara had danced, his arms wrapped around her slender waist, his eyes full of a love that was so pure, so absolute, it was almost sickening to witness. Later in the evening, she had found Julian alone on the terrace, a glass of champagne in his hand, a pensive look on his handsome face. She had come up behind him, her voice a low murmur in the cool night air. "A penny for your thoughts." He had turned, his eyes finding hers in the dim light. "I was just thinking how lucky I am," he had said, his voice thick with emotion. "Clara, she's everything to me. She's my anchor, my compass, my reason for being." The words had been a dagger to Eleanor's heart, each one twisting deeper than the last. She had forced a smile, her voice light and airy. "She's a wonderful girl. You deserve to be happy." "We are," he had replied, his gaze drifting back to the ballroom, where Clara was now laughing with a group of friends. "And a lot of that is thanks to you, Eleanor. You've given us so much." He had reached out then, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin in a gesture of affection. But in that moment, fueled by champagne and a potent cocktail of jealousy and despair, Eleanor had misinterpreted his touch. She had leaned in, her lips parting, her eyes closing, expecting, wanting him to kiss her. The moment had stretched on for an eternity, the silence broken only by the distant strains of the quartet and the frantic beating of her own heart. When she had finally dared to open her eyes, she had seen the look on his face. It was not desire, not passion, but a mixture of confusion, pity, and a dawning, horrified understanding. He had dropped his hand as if he had been burned, taking a step back, his voice a strained whisper. "Eleanor, I think you've had too much to drink." The shame had been a tidal wave, hot and suffocating. She had wanted the ground to swallow her whole, to disappear into the darkness and never be seen again. She had mumbled an apology, something about being tired, and had fled, her crimson gown a blur as she had rushed back into the house, her heart a shattered wreck in her chest. That night, as she had lain in her bed, the music from the party a distant, mocking echo. A cold, hard resolve had settled in her heart. Julian's rejection had not extinguished the fire of her obsession. It had stoked it into a raging inferno. He had not spurned her because he did not want her, she had told herself, but because he was a good man, a loyal husband, bound by his vows to a woman who did not deserve him. Clara was the obstacle. Clara, with her gentle nature, her unwavering trust, her placid, unassuming beauty. She was a pale, insipid watercolor, while Eleanor was a vibrant, passionate oil painting, full of color and life and raw, untamed emotion. Julian deserved a woman who could match his fire, a woman who could challenge him, a woman who could love him with the ferocity he deserved. He deserved her, and in the dark, silent hours of that night, a monstrous plan had begun to take root in the fertile ground of her twisted mind. If Clara was the obstacle, then she would have to be removed. It was a simple, brutal equation, a problem that required a permanent solution. The following weeks had been a blur of meticulous planning. Eleanor, a woman who had orchestrated countless charity galas and society events with military precision, now turned her formidable organizational skills to a far more sinister purpose. She had researched methods of murder, her nights spent scrolling through the darkest corners of the internet, her days spent maintaining the facade of the loving, supportive mother and mother-in-law. She had considered poison, but it was too risky, too easy to trace. A staged accident seemed too theatrical, too prone to unforeseen complications. She needed something clean, something efficient, something that would leave no room for error. And then she had found it. The inspiration had come from an unlikely source, a new industrial-grade waste disposal unit that was being installed in the estate's expansive kitchen. It was a behemoth of a machine, a gleaming stainless steel monster with a powerful motor and a set of razor-sharp blades that could pulverize anything from bone to solid wood. It had been purchased to handle the large amount of waste generated by the estate, a symbol of their wealth and consumption. But to Eleanor, it was something else entirely. It was the perfect instrument for her dark design. She had spent hours in the kitchen, studying the machine, familiarizing herself with its operation. She had read the instruction manual from cover to cover, her mind a cold, calculating machine as she had absorbed every detail. She had even tested it, feeding it large cuts of meat from the butcher, her heart a steady, rhythmic drum in her chest as she had watched the powerful blades reduce them to a slurry of organic matter in a matter of seconds. The plan was audacious, horrific, but in her warped perception, it was a necessary evil, a sacrifice that had to be made in the name of a love that was, in her mind, destined to be. She had convinced herself that she was not just doing this for herself, but for Julian as well. She was freeing him from a life of quiet mediocrity, offering him a world of passion and excitement that he could only dream of with a woman like Clara. The opportunity to put her plan into action came on a sweltering afternoon in late August. Julian was away on a business trip, a 2-day conference in a city several hours away. It was the perfect window of opportunity, a gift from the universe, a sign that she was on the right path. She had spent the morning with Clara, their time together a masterpiece of deception. They had gone for a walk in the gardens, their conversation light and breezy. Eleanor had played the part of the doting mother to perfection, listening with feigned interest as Clara had chattered on about her plans to redecorate the guest room, her desire to get a dog, her dreams of starting a family with Julian. Each word had been a fresh stab of the knife in Eleanor's heart, a reminder of the life that she was about to extinguish. Later, in the kitchen, as they had prepared a light lunch, Eleanor had put the final piece of her plan into motion. She had brewed a pot of Clara's favorite herbal tea, a fragrant blend of chamomile and lavender. But into Clara's cup, she had added a liberal dose of a powerful sedative she had obtained from a less than reputable online pharmacy. It was tasteless, odorless, and fast-acting, a ghost of a chemical that would leave no trace. "Here you are, darling," she had said, her voice a soothing balm as she had handed the cup to her daughter. "You've been looking a little tired lately. This will help you relax." Clara had taken the cup with a grateful smile, her trust in her mother absolute. her innocence a shield that was about to be shattered in the most brutal way imaginable. She had taken a sip, then another, her eyelids already starting to feel heavy. "You're right, Mother," she had said, her voice a little slurred. "I do feel sleepy." Eleanor's heart had hammered against her ribs, a wild, triumphant drumbeat. "Why don't you go and lie down for a while?" she had suggested, her voice a gentle coo. "I'll clean up here." Clara had nodded, her movements slow and uncoordinated. She had stumbled slightly as she had made her way out of the kitchen, her hand trailing along the wall for support. Eleanor had watched her go, a cold, predatory smile playing on her lips. The first part of her plan had been executed flawlessly. She had waited for what had felt like an eternity, the silence of the house pressing in on her, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. She had cleaned the kitchen with a methodical, almost obsessive-compulsive fervor, wiping down every surface, leaving no trace of their shared lunch. Finally, when she was certain that the sedative had taken full effect, she had made her way upstairs to Clara's room. She had found her daughter sprawled on the bed, her breathing deep and even, her face a mask of serene tranquility. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of something akin to remorse had stirred in Eleanor's chest. This was her daughter, her only child, the fruit of her womb. But then, she had thought of Julian, of the life that awaited them, and the flicker had been extinguished, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She had checked Clara's pulse, her touch clinical and detached. She was not dead, merely in a deep, drug-induced slumber. And that was exactly what she had wanted. She needed her to be alive, but incapacitated, unable to fight back, unable to scream. With a strength she hadn't known she possessed, she had lifted Clara's limp body from the bed, her daughter's head lolling against her shoulder. She was surprisingly light, almost weightless, as if she were already fading from the world. She had carried her down the back staircase, her movements swift and silent, her path illuminated by the dim light of the setting sun filtering through the windows. The house was a tomb, a silent witness to the unspeakable act that was about to unfold. In the kitchen, the waste disposal unit awaited, a silent, gleaming harbinger of death. She had laid Clara's body on the cool, tiled floor, her daughter's face pale and still in the twilight gloom. She had taken a moment to compose herself, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps, her mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. This was the point of no return, the final, irrevocable step. She had looked down at her daughter's face, at the gentle curve of her cheek, the soft sweep of her eyelashes against her skin. A memory had surfaced, unbidden, a ghost from a time long past. Clara as a little girl, her face alight with joy as she had ridden her first bicycle, her laughter echoing through the summer air. A tear had traced a path down Eleanor's cheek, a single solitary drop of moisture in the cold, barren landscape of her soul. But it was a tear of self-pity, not of grief. A tear for the life she had been denied, for the love she had never known. With a final, shuddering breath, she had pushed the memory away, her heart hardening into a block of ice. She had a task to complete, a destiny to fulfill. She had reached for the switch on the waste disposal unit, her fingers closing around the cold, hard plastic. The time for hesitation was over. The time for action was now. The machine hummed to life, a low, guttural growl that filled the cavernous kitchen, a prelude to the symphony of destruction that was about to begin. The final act of a tragedy born from a mother's twisted love was about to be written in blood. The hum of the industrial-grade waste disposal unit was a monstrous, living thing in the unnerving silence of the kitchen. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate in Eleanor's bones, a low, guttural growl that promised oblivion. She stood over Clara's still form, her daughter's body a pale, fragile thing against the cold, unforgiving tiles. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows across the room, turning the gleaming stainless steel of the machine into a sinister, gaping maw. For a moment, a wave of nausea so profound it threatened to buckle her knees washed over her. The sheer, unadulterated horror of what she was about to do slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. This was not some abstract concept, some dark fantasy played out in the recesses of her mind. This was real. This was her daughter, her Clara. The soft, warm bundle she had once held in her arms. The little girl whose scraped knees she had bandaged, whose bedtime stories she had read. A whimper escaped her lips, a small, pathetic sound that was instantly swallowed by the mechanical drone. No, I can't. But then, the image of Julian's face swam into her consciousness. Julian's smile, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed. Julian's hand in hers, his touch a brand of fire on her skin. Julian, who was bound by duty and honor to a woman who was a mere shadow, a pale reflection of the passion he truly deserved. A passion that only she, Eleanor, could provide. The thought was a jolt of ice water, shocking her out of her momentary weakness. This was not a murder. It was a liberation. She was not destroying a life. She was creating a new one, a better one, for herself and for Julian. The end justified the means. It had to. With a newfound, chilling resolve, she bent down and, with a grunt of effort that belied her slender frame, she began the gruesome task. She had to dismember the body. The thought was vile, a transgression against every law of nature and God. But it was a practical necessity. The machine, for all its power, had an opening that was not designed to accommodate a fully grown human. She had come prepared. In a locked cabinet in the pantry, a place no one but she ever entered, she had stashed a set of tools she had purchased online. Her search history a damning trail she had meticulously erased. A high-powered reciprocating saw, a set of heavy-duty butcher knives, and thick, rubber gloves that extended to her elbows. The first cut was the hardest. The sound of the saw biting into flesh and bone was a visceral, sickening scream that echoed in the cavernous kitchen. Blood, hot and shockingly red, sprayed across the pristine white tiles, a Pollock-esque splatter of crimson against a sterile canvas. Eleanor's stomach roiled, and she had to pause, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. She squeezed her eyes shut, the image of Julian her mantra, her shield against the encroaching madness. For Julian, for us, she worked with a frantic, desperate energy, her movements becoming more mechanical, more detached, as the minutes bled into what felt like an eternity. The room filled with the coppery, metallic scent of blood, a smell that would haunt her nightmares for the rest of her days. She was no longer Eleanor Sterling, the elegant, sophisticated matriarch of a wealthy family. She was a butcher, a monster, a creature of primal, unholy rage. One by one, she fed the dismembered parts of her daughter's body into the waste disposal unit. The machine took them with a greedy, grinding roar, the powerful blades making short, brutal work of flesh and bone. The sound was a symphony of destruction, a horrifying, cacophonous ode to her twisted love. With each piece that disappeared into the churning vortex, a part of her own humanity was ground away, leaving behind a cold, hard, empty shell. When it was over, when the last horrifying trace of her daughter had been consumed by the machine, she stood in the center of the blood-spattered kitchen, her body trembling, her mind a numb, echoing void. The silence that descended was more deafening than the roar of the machine had ever been. It was a silence filled with the ghosts of unspoken words, of a life cut brutally short, of a love that had curdled into a monstrous, all-consuming obsession. The cleanup was a feat of meticulous, almost fanatical precision. She was operating on pure adrenaline now, her grief and horror locked away in a dark, inaccessible corner of her mind. She scrubbed the floors and walls with a potent mixture of bleach and industrial-grade cleaner, the acrid smell burning her nostrils, a welcome distraction from the lingering scent of blood. She disassembled the saw and the knives, cleaning each piece with a surgeon's care before packing them away in a weighted bag. She showered, the water scalding hot, as if she could wash away the stain of her sin, the feeling of her daughter's blood on her skin. She scrubbed herself raw, her own skin turning a blotchy, angry red, but the feeling of being unclean, of being tainted remained. Dressed in fresh clothes, her hair meticulously styled, her makeup a perfect, impenetrable mask, she moved on to the next phase of her plan. the creation of a narrative. She went into Clara's room, the scent of her daughter's perfume a ghost in the air, a phantom limb of a memory. She packed a small suitcase, filling it with a random assortment of Clara's clothes, her toothbrush, a few of her favorite books. She wrote a note, her hand surprisingly steady, her forgery of Clara's delicate, looping script a masterpiece of deception. Dearest Julian, the note began, I need some time away. Some time to think. Please don't try to find me. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. I love you. The words were a cruel, twisted parody of the love that had once existed between her daughter and her husband. A love that she had so brutally extinguished. She placed the note on Julian's pillow, a silent, damning testament to her treachery. Then, she took Clara's car keys and drove her daughter's small, sensible sedan to a long-term parking garage at the airport, a place where it would sit, unnoticed, for weeks, perhaps even months. She wiped the car down, leaving no fingerprints, no trace of her presence. She took a taxi back to a location a few blocks from her home, walking the final distance under the cloak of darkness, a phantom in the night. Back in the sterile, silent house, she made herself a drink, a strong, neat scotch that did little to quell the tremor in her hands. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a gnawing, terrifying emptiness. The house, once a symbol of her success, of her carefully constructed life, now felt like a mausoleum, a tomb that held a secret so dark, so monstrous, it threatened to suffocate her. The next morning, when Julian was due to return, she put on the performance of a lifetime. She called him, her voice artfully laced with a frantic, worried edge. Julian, it's Clara, she had said, her words a carefully rehearsed script. She's gone. I woke up this morning and she was just gone. She could hear the confusion, the dawning panic in his voice. What do you mean, gone? Where did she go? I don't know, she had replied, a sob catching in her throat, a sound she had practiced in front of the mirror until it was perfect. There's a note. She said she needed time away. Julian, I'm so scared. He had rushed home, his face a mask of fear and disbelief. He had read the note, his hands trembling, his eyes scanning the carefully forged words as if they were a foreign language he couldn't comprehend. Eleanor had played the part of the distraught mother to perfection. She had wept, she had raged, she had offered a shoulder for Julian to lean on, a comforting presence in the storm of his confusion and grief. She had held him as he had broken down, his body racked with sobs, his heart shattered by a betrayal that was not even real. And as she had held him, a dark, triumphant satisfaction had bloomed in her chest. This was it. This was what she had wanted. He was turning to her, seeking solace in her arms. She was his rock, his anchor in this sea of uncertainty. The days that followed were a blur of police reports, of concerned friends and family, of a search that she knew would lead nowhere. She was a pillar of strength, a model of grace under pressure, her performance so convincing that no one, not even for a second, suspected the monster that lurked beneath the surface. She was there for Julian, a constant, unwavering presence. She cooked for him, she cleaned for him, she listened to him talk for hours about Clara, his voice thick with a grief that was both a torment and a source of perverse pleasure for her. She was his confidant, his companion, the only one who could truly understand the depth of his pain. And slowly, subtly, she began to weave her web around him. She would remind him of their shared interests, of the conversations they had had in the library, of the connection that had always existed between them. She would touch his arm, her fingers lingering for just a moment too long. She would look at him, her eyes full of a sympathy that was a mask for a much deeper, more dangerous emotion. She was patient. She knew that she could not rush things, that she had to let him grieve, that she had to be the supportive, understanding mother-in-law. But in the dark, silent hours of the night, when she was alone with her thoughts, she would allow herself to dream of the future, a future where Julian's grief had faded, a future where he would finally see her, not as his mother-in-law, but as the woman who had been there for him in his darkest hour, the woman who loved him with a passion that Clara could never have matched. But the ghost of Clara was a persistent, unwelcome presence. Her clothes still hung in the closet. Her favorite mug still sat on the shelf in the kitchen. Her scent still lingered in the air, a constant, silent accusation. And then there were the questions, the endless, probing questions from the police, from their friends, from their family. Did she seem unhappy? Were there any problems in the marriage? Did she have any secrets? Eleanor answered them all with a calm, measured composure, her lies so well crafted, so believable, that they were accepted as truth. But with each lie, the knot of fear in her stomach tightened. She was walking on a tightrope, a single misstep away from a fall that would be both swift and fatal. One evening, a few weeks after Clara's disappearance, a detective, a shrewd older man with eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed facade, came to the house. He had a few more questions, he had said, just a few loose ends to tie up. He had sat in the living room, his gaze sweeping over the opulent surroundings, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Sterling, he had begun, his voice deceptively gentle. We've been looking into Clara's financials, her phone records, her social media activity, and we've found nothing. Eleanor's heart had skipped a beat. What do you mean, nothing? I mean, there's no trace of her. No credit card charges, no phone calls, no posts online. It's as if she vanished into thin air. He had paused, his eyes locking with hers. And then there's the car. We found it at the airport, but there's no record of her ever buying a ticket, of her ever getting on a plane. The room had suddenly felt very cold, the air thick with an unspoken accusation. I don't understand, she had stammered, her voice a little shaky. Neither do we, the detective had replied, his voice still soft, but with an underlying edge of steel. It's a very unusual case, Mrs. Sterling. Very unusual indeed. He had left soon after, but his words had lingered in the air, a poison that seeped into the cracks of her carefully constructed reality. She was not as clever as she had thought. She had underestimated the tenacity of the police, the meticulous nature of their investigation. That night, for the first time since she had committed her horrific crime, she felt a genuine, gut-wrenching fear. The ghost of her daughter was no longer a silent, passive presence. It was a vengeful spirit, a specter that was slowly, inexorably, closing in on her. The symphony of silence that had once been a source of comfort was now a terrifying, oppressive weight, a prelude to a final, brutal crescendo. The house was no longer a gilded cage. It was a tomb, and she was trapped inside, a prisoner of her own monstrous secret. The detective's visit was the first crack in the foundation of Eleanor's carefully constructed world. His words, laced with an unspoken suspicion, echoed in the silent, cavernous rooms of the estate, a constant, unnerving reminder that she was not as safe, not as clever, as she had believed. The fear, a cold, venomous snake, began to uncoil in the pit of her stomach, its icy grip tightening with each passing day. She became jumpy, starting at every unexpected noise, her eyes constantly darting towards the windows as if she expected to see a legion of police cars swarming up the long, winding driveway. The mask of the grieving, supportive mother-in-law began to slip, her performance strained, her smiles a little too bright, her words a little too carefully chosen. Julian, consumed by his own grief and confusion, was initially oblivious to the subtle shifts in her demeanor. He clung to her, his need for her a balm to her frayed nerves, a reassurance that her horrific sacrifice had not been in vain. He was hers now, in a way he had never been before. He depended on her, confided in her, sought solace in her presence. The lines between mother-in-law and confidant, between comforter and something more, were beginning to blur, just as she had planned. But even in his grief, Julian was not a fool. He had loved Clara, and he had known her, truly known her, in a way that Eleanor, for all her maternal claims, never had. And the narrative she had so carefully crafted, the story of a wife who had simply walked away, was beginning to ring false. "It just doesn't make any sense," he said one evening, his voice a low, ragged whisper as they sat in the library, a room that had once been their sanctuary, a place of shared confidences and intellectual sparring. Now it felt like a cage, the walls lined with books that seemed to be silent, judging witnesses. Clara wouldn't just leave. Not without a word. Not without a reason. She loved me. I know she did. Eleanor's heart clenched. People do strange things when they're unhappy, Julian, she said, her voice a soothing, gentle murmur. Perhaps she was hiding a sadness that none of us could see. He looked at her then, his eyes, once so full of adoration for her daughter, now clouded with a dawning, terrible suspicion. Were you unhappy, Clara? He had asked the empty air, his voice cracking with a pain that was a fresh stab in Eleanor's heart. He then turned his gaze back to her, and for the first time, she saw not just grief in his eyes, but a flicker of something else, something colder, more analytical. You were with her that day, Eleanor. The day she left. Did she seem different? Did she say anything? The question was a direct hit, a torpedo to the hull of her carefully constructed ship of lies. She had to be careful, her answer a delicate, intricate dance on the edge of a razor blade. No, she said, her voice a little too quick, a little too sharp. She seemed perfectly normal. We had lunch, we talked about the garden. It was just an ordinary day. He continued to stare at her, his silence more damning than any accusation. The connection that had once crackled between them, the unspoken understanding that had been the fuel for her obsession, was gone, replaced by a chasm of doubt and suspicion. He was looking at her, really looking at her, for the first time since Clara's disappearance, and he was not seeing a grieving mother-in-law. He was seeing a stranger. The pressure continued to mount. The detective, the one with the knowing eyes, became a more frequent visitor, his questions more pointed, more probing. He wanted to know about the new waste disposal unit in the kitchen, its installation date, its specifications. He wanted to know about her online shopping history, her phone records, her movements on the day Clara had vanished. Eleanor, a woman who had always prided herself on her composure, her ability to control any situation, felt her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble around her. She was a rat in a maze, the walls closing in, the scent of the cheese a distant, mocking memory. The breaking point came in a way she could never have anticipated. It was not a clever piece of detective work, not a slip of the tongue, but a simple, mundane, domestic problem. A blockage in the plumbing system. The plumber, a burly, cheerful man with a no-nonsense attitude, had been working for hours, his snake-like camera feeding images back to a small, portable screen. Eleanor had watched him with a hawk's eye, a knot of pure, unadulterated terror tightening in her gut. The waste disposal unit, her perfect instrument of destruction, was connected to a complex network of pipes, a network that led to a septic tank at the far end of the property. Well, there's your problem, ma'am, the plumber had finally announced, his voice booming in the unnerving silence of the kitchen. He had pointed a grimy finger at the screen, where a grainy, black and white image showed a dense, fibrous mass lodged in a junction of the pipes. Looks like someone's been putting things down here they shouldn't have. Things this system ain't designed to handle. Eleanor's blood ran cold. She had been so careful, so meticulous, but she had overlooked this one crucial detail. She had assumed that the machine would pulverize everything, that the evidence of her crime would be washed away, diluted to nothingness. She had not counted on the resilience of human hair, the tiny, almost indestructible fragments of bone that could snag and accumulate, forming a gruesome, damning testament to her sin. The plumber, blissfully unaware of the true nature of his discovery, had managed to dislodge a small sample of the blockage. It was a vile, putrid mass of organic matter, and tangled within it, unmistakable, was a long strand of mousy brown hair. Clara's hair. The detective was summoned, his arrival swift and silent. He had looked at the sample, his face a grim, unreadable mask. He had looked at Eleanor, and in his eyes, she had seen not just suspicion, but a cold, hard certainty. The game was over. The search of the septic tank was a methodical, painstaking process, a grim archaeological dig into the depths of her depravity. And there, amidst the filth and the sludge, they had found it. Not a body, not even a recognizable part of a body, but something far more damning. A small, titanium plate, the kind used to mend a broken bone, with a serial number that was quickly and easily traced to a fracture Clara had sustained in a skiing accident years before. It was the final, irrefutable piece of evidence, the nail in the coffin of her lies. The unraveling was swift, brutal, and complete. Faced with the undeniable proof of her crime, her carefully constructed composure shattered into a million pieces. The elegant, sophisticated matriarch was gone, replaced by a ranting, hysterical woman, her confession a torrent of venom and self-pity. She had told them everything, her words a grotesque, twisted love story, a narrative in which she was the heroine, the tragic, misunderstood figure who had been driven to murder by a love so pure, so powerful, it transcended all morality. She had spoken of Julian, of their connection, of the life they were meant to have together, her voice full of a desperate, delusional conviction. Julian was there, in the cold, sterile interrogation room, a silent, spectral presence behind a one-way mirror. He had listened to her confession, to the story of how she had drugged and dismembered his wife, her own daughter, his face a frozen mask of horror and disbelief. The woman he had turned to for comfort, the woman he had trusted, was a monster, a creature of a depravity so profound it defied comprehension. The trial was a media circus, a spectacle of a tragedy that captured the public's imagination. Eleanor Sterling, the wealthy, beautiful widow, the loving mother, was a villainess of almost mythical proportions. Her story was a cautionary tale, a gothic horror story played out in the manicured lawns and opulent mansions of the super-rich. She had stood in the courtroom, a pale, emaciated version of her former self, her eyes hollow, her beauty faded, a ghost of the woman she had once been. She had shown no remorse, no flicker of guilt, her testimony a self-serving, narcissistic monologue that painted her as the victim, the one who had suffered the most. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. Guilty of murder in the first degree, a crime so heinous, so premeditated, that it carried the harshest of sentences. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. As they had led her away, her hands cuffed behind her back, her designer suit a cruel, ironic mockery of her former status, she had caught a glimpse of Julian in the crowded courtroom. Their eyes had met for a fleeting, terrible moment. And in his gaze, she had seen not hatred, not anger, but something far worse. A cold, absolute, and utter emptiness. The love that she had killed for, the man she had sacrificed her daughter and her soul for, was lost to her forever. A ghost in a life that was now nothing more than a barren, desolate wasteland. The Sterling estate, once a symbol of her success, was sold, its contents auctioned off, the proceeds going to a charity for victims of violent crime that Julian had established in Clara's name. The house, the scene of the unspeakable crime, was eventually torn down, its foundations ripped from the earth, as if to erase the stain of the evil that had been committed within its walls. And in her small, sterile prison cell, Eleanor Sterling was left with nothing but the ghosts of her past and the deafening, eternal silence of a future she had so brutally, so irrevocably, destroyed. The symphony of silence she had once so craved was now her eternal torment, a constant, mocking reminder of the love she had twisted into a monstrous, all-consuming obsession, of the daughter she had murdered, and of the life she had so completely, so utterly, annihilated. The gilded cage had become a concrete one, and she was its sole and eternal inhabitant.